video, I want to talk about post-exertional malaise a little bit more. When I first started being aware that I might have a condition called chronic fatigue syndrome, I wasn't yet diagnosed, but I had a friend who was already in the program, and she sent me a link to this article online, and it was about post-exertional malaise. As soon as I read it, I couldn't believe how many of the mysteries it unlocked when I finally understood what was happening in my body when it came to exertion of any kind, but mostly in this case, physical exertion. So when people with chronic fatigue syndrome push beyond their limits, they go into what's called a crash condition, where the person isn't able to recover well from exertion. And it can actually cause multiple things. I've experienced massive headaches, the heart pounding in the head, my face turning very red, shortness of breath, feeling nauseous and dizzy, feeling like you're going to throw up, and just a very long recovery process after physical exertion. So it could be playing floor hockey. I often played floor hockey and would experience this pretty much every time. Any kind of soccer or endurance sport, if I did any long distance running, if I did a bike ride that I wasn't typically doing, a longer one, I would experience this as well. So there's many ways you can experience PEM or post-exertional malaise, but there are ways that you can actually be aware and find out what your maximum capacity is through different means, and one of them is actually through heart rate monitors. And what the issue is with people with CFS is that we don't process oxygen well when we're doing a long-term exercise, and so we go into what's called an anaerobic state, and we draw on glucose and other metabolisms to create energy, and we're not as efficient at it. So a pro athlete would perhaps run for many miles before they would go into an anaerobic threshold where they would switch, and so they're more efficient at using oxygen. But people with CFS and also heart conditions aren't able to process that oxygen, and so one way you can gauge that is by measuring your heart rate. And so when I first heard this article, I was very intrigued and wanted to learn, and I was still experiencing times when I would just be doing routine chores around the house or trying to do some volunteering, and I would find that I would go into these crashes and not understand what my limits were. For example, one time I was brushing some debris from branches that had fallen down on our church steps, and after that I realized just how my head was aching. I felt sick. Then I looked at my heart rate monitor and I realized I was way over my threshold. And so typically what you would do in the past is you would have to go to a clinic that they would test your oxygen take-in and your carbon dioxide output, along with other measurements. And of course this would be a long test over 2 days, and not everybody can afford that, nor can even a lot of people with CFS endure it. And so one way that we can gauge and understand what our maximum capacity is through our heart rate. So I went out and I actually bought an Apple Watch. I bought the oldest one I could at the time. It was a Apple Watch 3, and I didn't want to get a different new brand because I had Apple products before. So you can find many options on the market, and there's many good ones. I've heard of Fitbit being good as well, and I have the Apple Watch 3, as I said, and it's been really good and compatible with my iPhone and my computer as well, and I can get all the readouts and pretty much instantaneous feedback. And so what happens is through the process of understanding how CFS patients are different, you can actually find your maximum heart rate. And so the maximum heart rate for humans is actually 220 beats per minute. And so to find out your individual maximum heart rate for good tolerance of exertion is to keep your heart rate at a certain rate, which is 220 minus your age. And then that's for the healthy person. For an unhealthy person with CFS, you would then multiply that by 0.6. So people with CFS are coming in at a 50 to 60% decrease in their capacity to process oxygen and go into that anaerobic state, but also required to keep their heart rate lower. So for example, I'm 50 years old, so if I take 220 minus the 50, that would be 170 is my threshold heart rate. And so I would have to be careful to keep it below 170, but then also taking it by the 0.6 as well. So I think it comes in at about 108 as my heart rate, and that isn't very much. That's oftentimes I go over it just walking, and so, but it's helped me realize that jogging is not really an option for me now, or doing extreme workouts online, doing even pushing a broom. Another realization for me was climbing with some friends a steep incline. I thought it was just going to be a leisurely hike, and it turned out to be quite an incline, and my heart rate went up to about 150, and I crashed massively that day, and it took me several days to recover, and just a lot of misery. So having my watch doesn't necessarily, my Apple Watch anyway, does not actually alarm when I hit that threshold, but it does alert me when I'm starting to feel symptoms of that pounding in my head, headache, nausea, dizziness, or just out of breath. And so that's when I can confirm that now is a good time to stop and to not do this action at the same rate or not at all. And so I've not tackled any inclines, walks, or pushing large brooms to sweep. So these are some indicators that I've found that have been very helpful. And just probably the most helpful thing that I've learned in terms of managing symptoms with CFS is pacing. And pacing is definitely being careful how much physical activity you do, and the heart rate monitor can definitely help with that, to check in with your heart rate. Another thing that the Apple Watch and others have is also a steps monitor. And so there's actually an estimated amount of steps that's healthy for a CFS patient. I think it's between 6,000 and 8,000 steps a day. And so you can also measure that way. Yeah, just good to have those helpers to be able to monitor, and they're external. So, you know, internally, you're not always aware what's happening. But externally, you have a verifying helper to help you realize that I'm over my threshold and I'm going into an anaerobic state, which is not healthy for an extended time of physical exercise. And the thing is that these are things that are just normal things. I'm not in any sports. I don't jog. I don't do aggressive workouts. These are just simply walks. And where it comes in most profoundly is in doing chores at home. So it could be like going up on the roof and cleaning my leaves in the fall, to monitor that in terms of duration, but also the heart rate, how I'm feeling. So all these different things add up. And the benefit of having a heart rate monitor, like I said, you have instant feedback, and you start to know the patterns, and you can look any time and see what your maximum heart rate was that day. And times when I have seen my heart rate increase to above what's healthy, I do find that when I look at the heart rate monitor input on my phone, that it's actually showing that my heart rate doesn't come down either. And so it seems that my heart rate gets too much, and I'll stay at that heart beats per minute a lot higher than normal as well. So these are some things I'm learning. But yeah, to use external monitors, I have a wrist watch, of course. There are monitors that are around your chest, but I've heard other people say that they're extremely uncomfortable, not always accurate, and of course very difficult to put on in public and to get a read on. And so I've just gone with the wrist monitor. I do have an external heart rate monitor too, just once in a while to measure blood pressure, but also heart rate, just to make sure things are okay too, and that I'm getting accurate readings and actually measure it in comparison to my Apple Watch as well. So pacing, preventing PEM or post-exertional malaise is key. The more you push over your limits, unfortunately, the worse you get. It's not something where, oh, I just have to work harder to get out of this. That being said, they do have this caveat that when you are thinking like, I need to see if I can push my limit a little higher, you just take small incremental steps. So maybe monitoring your heart to make sure that you're just 1 or 2 heartbeats above per minute. That way you're not putting too much strain on your body and going over and then resulting in a crash. As a person who has had a very highly active life in terms of physical activity, in terms of sports, and liking them and enjoying them, it's been very challenging to make this shift and to adjust expectations. But God has been very faithful to provide resources and understanding to know what's going on in my body. And also I think that there is a sense where I'm humbled as well. I think that it's easy in our sports when we are doing well and we're competitive that we think, hey, I'm pretty hot stuff. But there's a sense when you go through these limitations and things like injuries. I've talked to many people who have had some sort of injury and how it humbled them and made them more reliant upon God for their identity, and realizing that every person has their limits. Even scripture says, even the young grow weary and tired and faint. And so all of us have limits, and we need to learn to live within them. And physical exertion, monitoring through the heart rate is one way you can do that. I would say that it's very essential to understand that physical exertion is not the only thing that you need to monitor with CFS and with fibromyalgia, because if you push too hard physically, you can go into a crash that either results in extreme fatigue or extreme pain. And so that's what I experience with both. I either fall into a crash where I just get so tired that I just have a long time of recovery, or I can experience a lot of nerve pain as well, or sometimes both together. But that being said, physical exertion is just one component of the ways that we expend energy. The ones that weren't so apparent to me and that I was always frustrated by were especially social engagement. And when I would go to functions like church or even just parties, all these different social gatherings seemed to take a lot of energy. And where I did even the worst was extended long times of interaction with others. Fortunately for some, it was the highlight of the year, but for me it was always the worst. So when I had to go to conferences that were a week long, or even retreats that were 3 days, and I didn't get good sleep, or just a lot of meetings and social engagements and loudness and being with people all the time, these were very trying times for me. And I came to the point where I wasn't able to go to these meetings anymore. I even still struggle to go to church consistently because of my sensitivities to noise and loudness, but also just my energy levels don't always accommodate me to go to church every week. Another area too is just the cognitive. So I wrote for a decade, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't even do writing at home at a stay-home job. And I started to realize that cognitive writing using my brain, it's one of the highest users of glucose in the body. And when I did long, extensive times of writing for several hours at a time, I would just get such intense brain fog, and eventually just had to step away from that as well. But so yeah, you can't always monitor your fatigue levels by only your heart rate, and so you start to look at other things that can give you cues. So for me, it's eye fatigue, it's headaches, it's tension in my neck and my back, Oftentimes too, it's my chest, as I've had many chest pains with the onset of panic in the past. Strangely enough, after I had a more major attack, I get this tingling sensation in my left fingers. So it's a little warning sign to me. It's kind of like a little early warning light that things aren't going well if I can start to feel numbness or just a tingling. And so that's when I know to step back. And also too, just when I feel that sense of stress and irritability just increasing, and I'm just getting frustrated with doing something. It can be writing an email, or for me it's texting. When I am beyond my capacity and I'm trying to text and I'm making mistakes, and I just get so angsted and I just want to throw my phone or something like that. I just know it's time to probably just take a good extended break and give myself some rest. So these are insights I'm having to pace myself, to monitor myself, to be self-aware. That's a big part of this, is to be self-aware, but also to let go of ego. And for me, as a guy who wanted to be competitive and always on the go, up for the next thing, want to be the social, butterfly, or whatever it's called now, I had to kind of give up those egos and pace myself in terms of monitoring my physical exercise, not engaging in as many group sports, because I can't pace myself in groups. There's always an urgency when you're playing group sports to do your best and to push hard. And so I've just done more quiet personal sports, where it's mostly just walking, doing little things that I can monitor well. And then socially, just choosing how long to stay if I do go. So it's not like if you have CFS, you have to be a social withdrawal all the time, but just monitoring and saying, hey, I'm going to go and try for half an hour of social time at this social gathering. Or making your social gathering smaller, like just getting together with one person in the park, and instead of a coffee shop that's louder and can be harder to kind of get overstimulated by all the external stimuli. And also for being on the computer or doing activities where you're thinking, just taking breaks in between and having short stints of working and using that brain power. So these are some things that I've been learning, and trusting God. He's definitely working on my pride. I think that's the biggest thing I'm realizing through this whole process of giving up things, is that I have to give up my pride and my ego, and have to acknowledge that I'm limited, that I don't control my life, that God gives me my breath, He gives me my limits, and I would be best served to know them and to function within them, and to be humble and to acknowledge God's the one that's powerful, and He's given me all these gifts. And so in a strange way, I've been very thankful for CFS in my life to give me a humble perspective, and looking to God as the one who is all powerful and good, and the one for whom I get all my identity in. He's my creator, He's my redeemer, He's the one who loves me just as I am, unconditionally, unlike any other being in the universe. And so I entrust my future to Him, and I'm content with these limitations. And it's been a process. I haven't always been accepting. I've been resistant. I just wanted to push through, and I wanted to prove myself, and I wanted to push, but then unfortunately I just crashed and often got worse when I tried to do those things. So hopefully this is a little bit of good wisdom and understanding for you about pacing and about preventing post-exertional malaise using heart rate monitors, but also indicators that your body is giving you as well. Having CFS reminds me that I'm a creature and not the creator, that only the creator has inexhaustible energy, only the creator can do all things well. I cannot. I'm a creature, and a fallen creature at that. And so I have to really adjust my expectations that I place on myself. I often took a lot of pride in being a goer and a doer and a getting things kind of done kind of guy. And that was mostly shown through my work and my tenacity to work and to take on lots of responsibility and to always have things busy and doing things. But I've had to kind of reform my identity in a much more quiet and contemplative, but also restful posture, as I have had to embrace my diagnosis with CFS, but let go of having to be a go-go person and having to do all these things and being a leader and position and performance, all these outward markers of what we so easily think we can make ourselves important in front of others or in front of God, or just self-importance, thinking that you're pretty hot stuff because you have a certain position, or you're getting things done, or you're on a team that's just nailing it and winning. So yeah, those are some ways that God uses it to humble us. And yeah, I think that God has been gracious to me in that humbling process. It's not an easy one, and it's very painful, but at the same time I see the work He's doing, that He's the potter on the clay, and just yielding to allow Him to mold me and make me. That would be my prayer. And in the past, I would ask people to pray for me for energy, that I have more energy so I could do more for God. And I'd often ask God, why don't you give me more energy so I can do more, I can tell more people about God, and I can do all these things. But as I grew in acceptance of this condition that I have, it's not going away, it's permanent, most likely. It's more of a prayer to now use the energy I do have to glorify God and to help others, and to be satisfied in that, and to live within my limits of that. And so yeah, it's more of a prayer of stewardship of the energy I do have. Help me to be wise in using it well, and to be content with what my contribution can be, even if it's not what others are making, or even if it's not what I would hope, the heights of success I would hope for. And so being content with just doing the work that God has given us and the energy He's given us, and realizing that it's feeble and it's frail, but He can multiply it if we rest and place our trust in Him.